Think about how you treat my sister. He said. My name's Emily Lopez. I'm 34 years old and I work as a marketing director at Riverside Communications in Portland, Oregon. That night, sitting on my own guest room bed with my belongings scattered around me like I was the intruder, I did exactly what my husband David asked. I thought about how I treated Jessica. I thought about how I'd been paying her car insurance for 10 months. How I'd covered her credit card payments 3 times without a single word of gratitude. How she left her makeup and hair products all over my bathroom counter, claiming the guest bathroom wasn't good enough for her routine. How she borrowed my designer clothes and returned them stained or stretched. How she used my car for her weekend trips, bringing it back with scratches and an empty tank, sometimes even parking tickets I had to pay. If you've ever been called selfish for wanting respect in your own home, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you're ready to hear how I stood up for myself. My name is Emily Lopez. Jessica had been living with us for a year and 7 months, not visiting, living. My home office had become her personal beauty salon, complete with her Instagram ring lights, her clothes hanging everywhere, and her entitled attitude that I owed her the lifestyle she couldn't afford. The conversation that landed me in the guest room had been straightforward enough. I'd sat down with David and Jessica after dinner, spread out our monthly expenses on the dining table, and explained that my promotion at work wasn't covering Jessica's impact on our budget. We need to establish some boundaries, I'd said, looking directly at Jessica. Either you start contributing to rent and utilities, or we need to discuss you finding your own place. Jessica had scoffed. Actually scoffed. Find my own place? Emily, I'm building my brand. You know how expensive rent is in Portland. This is what sisters do for each other. David had immediately jumped to her defense. Emily, that's completely unreasonable. Jessica is working on her influencer career. She's investing in her future. The influencer career that had earned her exactly $247 in the past 6 months. Jessica had been building her brand since she moved in, but somehow never quite generated enough income to support herself. Too many other influencers, not enough engagement, brands weren't paying fairly. Always an excuse. I'd watched my savings account drain month by month. Watched David make excuses for behavior he'd never tolerate from anyone else. Watched my own home become a place where I felt like I was living in someone else's space. That night in the guest room, staring at the ceiling that now had Jessica's glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to it, something crystallized inside me. It wasn't rage exactly, more like awakening. I'd been so focused on keeping everyone happy, on being the supportive sister, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to have my own needs respected. David's words echoed in my head. Think about how you treat my sister. I had treated her like family. I'd given her a home, financial support, and patience she didn't deserve. And somehow that made me the selfish one in this story. The house hummed with the sound of Jessica's multiple devices charging upstairs. My devices, plugged into my outlets in my house, paid for with my salary. I closed my eyes and started making a plan. David and I had been married for 5 years. We bought this house together 3 years ago, a beautiful craftsman-style home in southeast Portland. It wasn't huge, but it was ours, or at least it had been. Jessica appeared in March of the previous year. David's younger sister, 28 years old and fresh off what he called a really toxic work situation. She'd been living in Seattle, working at a startup that had suddenly folded. But she'd quit 2 weeks before they announced the closure, claiming the work environment was damaging her mental health. Suddenly she needed a place to stay. Just for a month or 2, David had promised, until she figures out her next move. I'd agreed because that's what you do for family. You help when people are struggling. My own sister had stayed with me for 6 weeks after her divorce, but she'd paid for groceries and cleaned the house daily while she was there. Jessica was different. She moved in like she'd been invited to a year-long retreat. The first month, I'd assumed she was still processing her job loss. By the 4th month, I'd started subtly mentioning job openings I'd seen. By the 7th month, I'd begun having direct conversations about timelines. David always had a response ready. The gig economy was brutal. Jessica was dealing with anxiety from her last job. She just landed a brand partnership that was going to change everything. She needed time to heal and find her passion. Meanwhile, my grocery bill had nearly tripled. She ate exclusively organic, gluten-free, and expensive. Our utility costs skyrocketed from someone being home all day with multiple ring lights, a hair styling station, and every electronic device imaginable running simultaneously. My car developed mysterious new dings. My expensive skincare products disappeared at an alarming rate. My credit cards started getting charged for things I'd never bought. The boundary conversations had started 4 months ago. Gentle ones initially. Me mentioning to David that maybe Jessica could contribute to the electric bill. Him explaining that she was family and I was being unsupportive of her entrepreneurial journey. Me suggesting she might help with household chores. Him reminding me that she was dealing with career trauma and needed space to recover. Last month I'd tried a different approach. I'd sat down with Jessica directly, woman to woman. Explained that I wasn't trying to kick her out, but we needed to establish some expectations about financial contributions and house rules. She'd nodded sympathetically, agreed completely, then changed absolutely nothing. 3 weeks ago, I discovered she'd been using my Amazon Prime account to order hundreds of dollars worth of beauty supplies and workout equipment. When I confronted her, she'd claimed she thought it was fine since we were family. When I mentioned it to David, he'd said I was being petty about money. That's when I'd started noticing other things. How David's demeanor shifted whenever I brought up Jessica. How he'd started treating my concerns like personality defects. How he'd begun making me feel guilty for wanting basic consideration in my own home. The warning signs had been flashing for months. I'd just been too busy trying to be the understanding wife to see them clearly. The realization hit me around 2:30 a.m., lying in that guest room with scratchy sheets that smelled like Jessica's vanilla body spray. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about chores or respect or even Jessica's freeloading. This was about the fact that my husband had chosen his sister over me, and I'd been too busy trying to fix things to acknowledge it. David had exiled me to the guest room like I was a problematic houseguest in my own home because I'd asked his sister to contribute financially or make other arrangements. I thought about the last year and 7 months. Really examined it. Every conversation where David had dismissed my concerns. Every time he'd made me feel selfish for wanting my own space back. Every instance where he'd treated Jessica's comfort as more important than our marriage. The pattern was undeniable once I stopped making excuses for it. David had made his choice long ago. He just never bothered to tell me. I sat up in bed and looked around the guest room. My furniture, my house, my life. But somehow I was the one displaced because I'd suggested that a grown woman should support herself. The anger came slowly, like sunrise, not the explosive kind that makes you throw things and scream. The quiet kind that burns steady and transforms everything. I walked into the kitchen and made tea at 2:45 a.m. Sat at the island where I'd tried to have that reasonable conversation about expenses just hours earlier. The island where Jessica had scoffed at the idea of contributing to her own living situation. That's when I understood what had to happen. I wasn't going to argue about this anymore. I wasn't going to have another conversation about fairness or boundaries or mutual respect. I wasn't going to try to convince David that his wife's feelings mattered as much as his sister's convenience. I was done. The decision settled into my bones like something that had always belonged there, waiting for me to recognize it. I wasn't angry at David anymore. I wasn't frustrated with Jessica. I was simply finished with a situation that had no resolution as long as I was the only one trying to resolve it. I finished my tea and returned to the guest room. But I didn't try to sleep. Instead, I started making a mental inventory of everything I needed to do. The clarity that had come over me in the kitchen stayed with me as I sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time in months, I wasn't trying to figure out how to fix the situation. I wasn't strategizing about different ways to approach David or Jessica. I wasn't making excuses for their behavior or wondering what I could do differently to make things work. I was planning my exit. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because I was contemplating ending a 5-year marriage, walking away from a house I loved, disrupting the life I'd built. Liberating because I finally understood that I didn't have to keep living in a situation that made me feel like a stranger in my own home. I thought about my grandmother, who had raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. Abuela Carmen had been the strongest woman I'd ever known, a widow who'd raised 4 children on her own after my grandfather died young. She'd worked 2 jobs, saved every penny, and never once complained about how hard life was. But she'd also never tolerated disrespect, not from her children, not from her employers, not from anyone. Mija, she used to tell me, the moment you start accepting less than you deserve is the moment you stop deserving better. I'd thought about those words often over the past year, but I'd always found ways to rationalize why this situation was different. Jessica was family. She was going through a hard time. She needed support. Marriage required compromise. I should be more understanding. But sitting there in the guest room at 3 a.m., I finally heard Abuela's voice clearly. This wasn't about compromise or understanding or family loyalty. This was about accepting less than I deserved, and by accepting it, I'd been teaching David and Jessica that this was all I was worth. Abuela had died 3 years ago, but I could almost feel her presence in that room. She would have taken one look at this situation and told me exactly what she thought. She would have asked me why I was working so hard to subsidize someone else's laziness while my own husband lied to me about money. She would have wondered why I was sleeping in the guest room of my own house because I'd asked a grown woman to take responsibility for herself. Most importantly, she would have been disappointed that I'd forgotten the lessons she'd taught me about self-respect. I got up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. Our neighborhood was full of young families and working professionals, people who got up early, worked hard, and took care of their responsibilities. Normal people living normal lives, not enabling adult children who refused to grow up. In the house next door, I could see Mrs. Chen's kitchen light was on. She was probably getting ready for her morning walk, something she'd done every day for the 10 years I'd known her. Mrs. Chen had immigrated from Taiwan in her 20s with nothing but her education and determination. She'd worked as a nurse for 40 years, raised 3 children who all became doctors or engineers, and retired with dignity and financial security. Mrs. Chen had never had to support a grown adult who contributed nothing to society except makeup tutorials for 800 followers. The comparison made me feel ridiculous. Here I was, a successful marketing professional with a graduate degree and a 6-figure salary, allowing myself to be manipulated by someone whose greatest achievement in the past year was gaining 40 Instagram followers. I thought about my colleagues at work, strong women who balanced demanding careers with families and personal lives. What would they think if they knew I was sleeping in my guest room because I'd asked my sister-in-law to get a job? What would they say if they knew I'd been subsidizing someone else's fantasy career while putting my own professional growth on hold? The shame of it hit me all at once. I'd been so focused on being understanding and supportive that I'd completely lost sight of how absurd the situation had become. I was enabling someone who was perfectly capable of taking care of herself, and I'd allowed my husband to gaslight me into thinking that made me selfish. But the shame was quickly replaced by something else, determination. I'd spent enough time being ashamed of wanting basic respect in my own home. I'd spent enough energy trying to accommodate people who had no intention of accommodating me. I'd wasted enough of my life trying to fix a problem that could only be solved by the people who were creating it. First, I'd call in sick tomorrow. Then I'd start looking for my own apartment. Something modern, something mine. Somewhere I could drink tea at my own kitchen counter without feeling like an intruder. I pulled out my phone and started researching apartments online. Portland's rental market was competitive, but I had excellent credit, stable income, and enough savings for a substantial deposit. I bookmarked several promising listings and made notes about which neighborhoods I wanted to target. As I scrolled through apartment photos, I realized I was excited about the prospect of decorating my own space again. For the past year and a half, I'd felt like I couldn't make any changes to our house because Jessica was always there, always taking up space, always treating our home like her personal studio. I'd stopped buying art or rearranging furniture because it felt pointless when every room had Jessica's belongings scattered around. But my own apartment would be different. I could choose my own color scheme, arrange my furniture however I wanted, hang my grandmother's paintings without worrying about whether they'd interfere with someone's ring light setup. The sun was rising when I finally closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt like I could think clearly. David found me drinking coffee in the kitchen the next morning. He was already dressed for his job at the architecture firm, moving around like nothing had happened, like he hadn't banished his wife to the guest room the night before. "You left the coffee maker on all night," he said, not looking at me. "I made fresh coffee at 2:45 He paused, finally meeting my eyes. "Emily, about last night. I've been thinking about what you said about Jessica contributing more." Her expression softened. He probably thought I was going to apologize. Good, because she's family and family supports each other through difficult transitions. "I'm calling in sick today. We need to have a serious conversation about this situation." The softness disappeared. "What kind of conversation?" "The kind where we figure out if this marriage is still working for both of us." David set down his coffee mug hard enough to splash liquid onto the granite counter. "Are you seriously threatening divorce because I defended my sister?" "I'm not threatening anything. I'm trying to understand why asking a grown woman to contribute to her own living expenses makes me the villain in this house." "Because you knew she was going through a difficult time when she moved in. You agreed to help her get back on her feet." "It's been almost 2 years, David. She's not getting back on her feet. She's getting comfortable." He turned away from me, grabbing paper towels to clean up the spilled coffee. "She's building something. Her following has grown by 40% in the last 6 months. When was the last time she made more than $100 in a month from this business?" Silence. "When was the last time she even tried to get a regular job?" More silence. "David, she spent $300 on my Amazon account last month on things she claimed were business expenses. Ring lights and organic face masks are not business expenses. It was a misunderstanding. She's learning how to manage her finances. She's been learning for almost 2 years. Yesterday, I found out she owes your cousin Rachel $1,200 and never mentioned it. How is any of this my fault for bringing it up?" David finished cleaning the counter and turned back to me. His face had that stubborn expression I'd learned to recognize, the one that meant he'd already decided I was wrong and wasn't interested in hearing evidence to the contrary. "Jessica is going through the most challenging period of her life. She lost her job, her confidence, her sense of direction. And instead of supporting her like family should, you're nitpicking about utilities and groceries." "I'm not nitpicking. I'm asking for basic respect and responsibility from someone who's living off our generosity while treating our home like a hotel." "David, she's not struggling to find herself. She's sleeping until noon, spending 3 hours a day on makeup tutorials, and ordering expensive smoothies while I work 50-hour weeks to keep us afloat." His voice went cold. "So what are you saying? That we should abandon her when she needs us most?" "I'm saying we should treat her like an adult who's capable of taking care of herself, with clear expectations and a timeline." "You want me to choose between you and my sister?" The words hung in the air between us. He'd said it like an accusation, but he was right. That's exactly what I wanted because that's exactly what the situation had become. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I guess I do." David stared at me for a long moment. Then he picked up his messenger bag and headed for the door. "I'm going to work. When I get home tonight, I expect you to have figured out how to be more supportive of my family." The door closed behind him with a definitive click. I sat there in the empty kitchen, listening to the sound of his Subaru pulling out of the driveway. Then I heard Jessica's phone alarm going off upstairs, followed by the sound of her hitting snooze for the 4th time. I spent the morning diving into our financial records. Bank statements, credit card bills, utility payments, subscription services. I'd been tracking the numbers mentally for months, but seeing them documented made the situation crystal clear. Our monthly expenses had increased by 71% since Jessica moved in. Not just from an additional person in the house, but from someone who consumed resources like she was trying to win a competition. The electric bill alone had more than doubled. Our grocery costs had gone from $180 a month to over $450. But the real discovery came when I started examining our joint credit card activity more closely. 4 months ago, David had made a cash advance of $600. When I'd asked about it at the time, he'd said it was for a work emergency and he'd forgotten to mention it. I'd accepted the explanation because $600 wasn't catastrophic, and I trusted my husband. 3 months ago, another $800 cash advance. This time, he'd mentioned something about helping a colleague, but he'd been vague about the specifics. Last month, $500. He'd said it was for car repairs that ended up being less expensive than expected. I pulled up our online banking and went back further. The pattern was there, going back almost to when Jessica first moved in. Small cash advances here and there, always with plausible explanations, always in amounts that wouldn't trigger a major discussion. Jessica wasn't just not contributing to the household. David had been giving her money, our money he'd been taking from our joint accounts and handing over to his sister without telling me. I sat back in my desk chair and stared at the computer screen. The betrayal wasn't just about choosing Jessica over me. It was about lying to me while he did it. I thought about all the conversations we'd had about being careful with spending. How I'd been taking on extra projects at work when possible. How I'd been putting off replacing my laptop because we needed to be mindful of our budget. How I'd been feeling guilty about every small indulgence while David was secretly funding his sister's lifestyle. My phone buzzed. David's name on the screen. "I've been thinking about this morning," he said when I answered. "I think we both said things we didn't mean." "Did we?" "Emily, I know the situation isn't ideal, but Jessica really is struggling and she's family. I need you to understand that." "How much money have you given her?" Silence. "David, how much money have you given Jessica from our joint accounts?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "I'm looking at our credit card statements right now. Cash advances going back over a year. Always with explanations that didn't quite make sense." More silence. "Jesus Christ, David. How much?" His voice was barely audible. "Maybe $4,000. Over the whole time she's been here. $4,000 on top of all the food, utilities, and everything else I'd been paying for. $4,000 he'd given to his sister while telling me we needed to watch our spending. David, she needed help. Real help, not just a place to stay." "So you decided to help her with our money without telling me?" "I knew you'd say no." "You're damn right I would have said no because we're married, David. We're supposed to make financial decisions together. I was trying to help my family." "I thought I was your family too." The line went quiet except for the sound of his breathing. "I'll be home around 6:30, he said finally. "We need to discuss this properly." He hung up before I could respond. I didn't wait until 6:30. After David hung up, I called 4 apartment complexes in different neighborhoods around Portland. The first one had a 1-bedroom available next week. The second had a studio with immediate availability. The third could show me something that afternoon. The fourth had exactly what I was looking for. I drove to Hawthorne Heights at 1:30 p.m. and walked through a spacious 1-bedroom apartment with exposed brick walls and a kitchen that overlooked the city. It was quiet. It was beautiful. It was mine if I wanted it. "I'll take it," I told the property manager. "Don't you want to see the other units? Discuss it with your husband?" "No." I signed the lease and paid the deposit with money from my personal savings account. The account David didn't have access to. The one I'd been contributing to each month since we'd gotten married, thinking of it as emergency money. This qualified as an emergency. By 3:30 p.m. I was back home, packing systematically. Not everything, just the essentials. Clothes, my work equipment, my books, a few pieces of furniture that had been mine before the marriage. I worked methodically like I was managing a project at work. Jessica wandered downstairs around 4 o'clock, probably looking for something to eat. "Rearranging your closet?" she asked, watching me carry a suitcase past the living room. "Something like that." "Need help?" The offer was so absurd I almost laughed. Jessica volunteering to help with physical labor. "No thanks." She shrugged and went into the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator open and close, then the sound of the blender starting up. Another Sharmayuan smoothie, no doubt. I made 4 trips to the apartment, bringing over the basics. Each trip felt more liberating than the last. Loading my car with my belongings, I remembered buying each item, choosing it, earning the money to pay for it. These weren't just possessions, they were pieces of my independence that I'd somehow allowed to become entangled in someone else's drama. During the second trip, I found myself actually smiling as I carried my grandmother's antique jewelry box to the car. Jessica had asked to borrow it twice for photo shoots that never materialized into anything profitable. I'd always said no, but the fact that she'd even asked showed how entitled she'd become to everything in my house. On the third trip, I packed my professional wardrobe. Suits I'd bought for important presentations, dresses I'd worn to industry events where I'd networked and built the career that was now supporting 3 adults instead of 2. Looking at these clothes, I realized how much I'd shrunk myself professionally over the past year. I'd turned down speaking opportunities because I didn't want to leave David alone to deal with Jessica. I'd declined after-work networking events because I felt guilty about the money I might spend. I'd even passed on a conference in San Francisco because the registration fee seemed too expensive when we were supporting a third person. That's when it hit me, Jessica hadn't just been draining our finances. She'd been limiting my potential, my growth, my opportunities. Every decision I'd made had been filtered through the lens of, can we afford this with Jessica here? I'd been subsidizing her imaginary career while putting my real career on hold. The fourth trip was the most symbolic. I packed my home office supplies, my laptop, my external monitor, my ergonomic chair. This was the equipment I used to earn the money that kept our household running while Jessica pursued her passion project of posting makeup tutorials to 847 followers. I'd watched her filming herself in my home office, using my lighting, my backdrop, even my plants as props, while I worked late into the night to meet deadlines and bring in the income that supported her lifestyle. As I carried my laptop bag to the car, I thought about all the times I'd worked from home while Jessica treated the house like her personal studio. The constant interruptions asking to borrow my ring light, my tripod, my extension cords. The noise from her filming sessions when I was trying to concentrate on important calls. The way she'd rearranged my office furniture without asking to get better angles for her videos. I'd been enabling her just as much as David had, just in different ways. Every time I'd said yes to letting her use my equipment, every time I'd stayed quiet when she took over my workspace, every time I'd worked around her schedule instead of asserting my own needs, I'd been sending the message that her hobby was as important as my career. But no more. As I loaded my car for the final time, I felt like I was reclaiming not just my possessions, but my professional identity, my personal space, and my future. On the final trip, I stopped at a stationery store and bought a pack of note cards. I wrote a simple message on one of them. "David, I'm done being treated like the problem in my own home. I'm done having my concerns dismissed and my boundaries ignored. I'm done being lied to about money. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. Don't contact me until you're ready to have an honest conversation about what happened here. Emily." I left the note on the kitchen island, propped against the coffee maker where he'd see it when he got home. Then I walked through the house one final time. Not out of nostalgia, but to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything important. The place already felt different, like a hotel I'd checked out of but hadn't quite left yet. I was loading the last box into my car when my neighbor Mrs. Chen came over. She was a retired teacher, maybe 65, who'd lived next door since before David and I had bought the house. "Everything all right, Emily?" "Just making some changes." She looked at my car, then back at me. Mrs. Chen wasn't naive. She'd probably heard some of the discussions over the past few months. "You know where to find me if you need anything." "Thanks, Mrs. Chen." Take care of yourself. I drove to the apartment and moved everything in during 2 trips. It didn't take long. Amazing how little you actually need when you strip away all the complications. By 7 p.m., I was sitting in my new kitchen with a glass of wine and takeout Thai food, looking out at the city lights. No ring lights upstairs. No makeup scattered across my bathroom counter. No one using my things or spending my money or making me feel guilty for wanting basic respect. My phone had been buzzing for the past 2 hours. Text messages from David. I turned it off without reading them. For the first time in almost 2 years, I was home. 4 days later, David showed up at my apartment. I opened the door to find him standing in the hallway with bloodshot eyes and a desperate expression. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Emily, please. We need to talk. We can talk right here. Can I come in?" "No." He took a shaky breath. "Jessica is gone." "Good for Jessica. You don't understand. She left 2 days ago, packed all her things, and disappeared. No explanation, no forwarding address. Just gone." I leaned against the doorframe and waited for him to continue. "I can't afford the mortgage payments without your income. I called the bank and they said I have 60 days to catch up on the payments or they'll begin foreclosure proceedings. That's unfortunate. I know I messed up. I know I should have told you about the money, but we can fix this. We can work through it." "How much money did you give her, David? The real number?" His voice cracked. "About $6,000 total." $6,000, not $4,000 like he'd admitted on the phone. $6,000 of our money, handed over to his sister while he told me we needed to be cautious about expenses. "She took it all when she left," he continued. "Everything I'd given her, plus she maxed out the credit card I'd added her to as an authorized user. The one I never told you about. She charged another $3,000 and disappeared." The irony was perfect. Jessica had finally shown David exactly who she was, but only after he'd destroyed his marriage to protect her. "I'm sorry that happened to you. Emily, please, I'll do anything. I'll go to counseling. I'll make it all up to you. Just come home." "I am home. You know what I mean." I looked at this man I'd been married to for 5 years. He was asking me to fix a problem he'd created by lying to me and choosing his sister over our marriage. He wanted me to come back and rescue him from the consequences of his own decisions. "No." "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no, David. I'm not coming back. I'm not fixing this. You made your choice when you sent me to the guest room for asking your sister to be a responsible adult. You made your choice when you started lying to me about money. And Jessica made her choice when she stole from you and disappeared. But I love you. If you loved me, you wouldn't have treated me like the enemy for over a year." He started crying then. "Please don't do this. Please don't leave me. I already left 4 days ago." 3 weeks after I'd moved out, I decided to change my phone number. I was tired of the constant messages from David, ranging from angry accusations to desperate pleas. The final straw came when he started having Jessica text me from her phone, pretending she wanted to work things out between us girls. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. When I went to the Verizon store to get a new number, the representative asked if I needed to transfer my account. That's when I discovered that David had been the primary account holder on our family plan, and Jessica was listed as an authorized user. She'd been getting a top-tier unlimited plan with international roaming for the past 1.5 years, all charged to David's credit card. Another monthly expense he'd never mentioned, another way he'd been financially supporting her while telling me we needed to be careful about money. I opened my own account that day. It felt like cutting the last cord tying me to that situation. The divorce proceedings started a month later. David contested everything, claiming I'd abandoned the marriage without trying to work things out. His lawyer painted me as someone who'd chosen money over family. My lawyer painted a different picture, one of financial deception, boundary violations, and a husband who'd consistently chosen his sister over his wife. The discovery process was illuminating. David had to disclose all financial transactions, and the full scope of his support for Jessica became clear. Beyond the $6,000 in cash advances, there was the phone bill, the car insurance he'd been paying for her car, the health insurance he'd added her to through his work plan, even a credit card in her name that he'd been paying the minimum balance on for months. All told, Jessica had cost us over $15,000 in direct expenses, not counting the increased utilities, food, and wear and tear on the house. What hurt most wasn't the money itself, it was the elaborate deception. David had created an entire financial structure to support Jessica while telling me we couldn't afford small luxuries for ourselves. When I'd wanted to upgrade our kitchen appliances, he'd said we should wait until our financial situation was more stable. When I'd suggested a weekend getaway for our anniversary, he'd worried about the expense. All while secretly funding his sister's lifestyle to the tune of more than $1,000 a month. During mediation, David's lawyer suggested that I was being vindictive, that families should support each other during difficult times. I looked across the table at David and asked him one question. If Jessica had been my sister instead of yours, and I'd been giving her thousands of dollars without telling you, how would you have reacted? He couldn't answer. The house sold quickly. Portland's real estate market was strong, and we'd built up decent equity over the 3 years we'd owned it. After paying off the mortgage and splitting the remaining proceeds, I had enough for a substantial down payment on a place of my own. 8 months later, I ran into David's cousin Rachel at a coffee shop in the Pearl District. "Hey, Emily. How have you been?" "Really good, actually. Can't complain." She paused, clearly debating whether to bring up the obvious topic. "I heard about you and David." "Yeah." For what it's worth, I never understood why he enabled Jessica's behavior for so long. That girl was trouble from day one. "Have you heard from her lately?" Rachel shook her head. "Not since she disappeared." David asked around the family trying to find her. Turns out she'd been borrowing money from everyone and never paying it back. She owed my mom $500 from last year that we never knew about. My Aunt Sarah said Jessica had been hitting her up for grocery money for months, claiming David and Emily were being really strict about expenses. The picture kept getting clearer. Even months later, Jessica hadn't just been taking advantage of David and me. She'd been working her way through the entire extended family, one generous relative at a time, spinning different stories to each person to maximize her take. "The really crazy part," Rachel continued, "is that we found out she'd been doing this for years, even before she moved in with you guys. She'd borrowed money from our cousin Mike in Seattle right before she moved to Portland, telling him she needed help with her toxic work situation. He gave her $2,000 thinking it was a one-time thing to help her relocate. She never paid him back either." I thought about Jessica's sob story when she'd first arrived. The dramatic tale of workplace toxicity, the sudden company closure, the desperate need for temporary shelter. How much of it had been true? How much had been carefully crafted to generate maximum sympathy and support? "How's David doing?" "Lost the house 3 months ago. He's renting a studio apartment in Gresham now. Works 2 jobs just to pay for that." Rachel looked uncomfortable. "He asks about you sometimes. Whether anyone's heard how you're doing. I think he's finally starting to understand what he lost." "I'm doing great. Got promoted to senior director last month. Bought a condo downtown. Started my own consulting business on the side. Life's really good." And it was good. Better than it had been in years. I'd learned to enjoy my own company again. Made new friends through work and hiking groups. Started taking art classes and signed up for a pottery workshop. I'd joined a book club and started dating again. Nothing serious yet, but it was nice to remember what it felt like to have conversations with someone who actually listened to my thoughts and respected my opinions. The consulting business had been an unexpected development. With Jessica no longer draining my mental energy and finances, I'd found myself with bandwidth to take on freelance marketing projects. What started as a way to earn extra money had evolved into a legitimate side business with 3 regular clients. For the first time in years, I was growing professionally instead of just surviving financially. The transition hadn't been immediate. For the first few weeks after moving out, I'd felt unmoored, like I was floating without an anchor. I'd spent so much energy managing the Jessica situation that I'd forgotten what it felt like to have my thoughts to myself. I kept expecting crisis phone calls or dramatic emergencies that never came. But gradually, I began to remember who I was before the chaos. I started accepting invitations to industry events again. I joined the Portland Women in Marketing group and began attending their monthly networking meetups. I signed up for a digital strategy certification course that I'd been putting off for over a year because I hadn't wanted to spend the money while supporting Jessica. The certification course led to my first consulting client, a small nonprofit that needed help with their social media strategy. The project was only worth $2,000, but it felt like winning the lottery. This was money I'd earned using skills I'd developed, money that would go directly into my own bank account without being diverted to fund someone else's lifestyle. Word spread quickly in Portland's tight-knit nonprofit community. My second client was a local restaurant chain that needed help with their brand repositioning. My third was a tech startup looking to launch their first major marketing campaign. Within 6 months, I was earning almost as much from consulting as I had been giving to Jessica in direct and indirect support. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been telling Jessica that she needed to monetize her social media presence while I'd been sitting on my own untapped income potential. Working for myself reminded me how much I'd missed having control over my professional life. At Riverside Communications, I was good at my job, but I was still working within someone else's vision, someone else's timeline, someone else's priorities. With my consulting clients, I was setting the strategy, making the creative decisions, seeing projects through from concept to completion. The success of the consulting business also made me realize how much the Jessica situation had been holding back my career. I'd been so focused on just getting through each day without a household crisis that I'd stopped pushing myself professionally. I'd stopped volunteering for challenging projects, stopped pitching innovative ideas, stopped positioning myself for advancement. But now, with a clear head and renewed energy, I found myself taking on leadership roles at work that I'd previously avoided. I pitched a major campaign overhaul that resulted in a 40% increase in client engagement. I led a cross-departmental project that streamlined our content creation process. I started mentoring junior staff members and speaking at industry conferences. The promotion to senior director came 8 months after I'd left David, but it felt like the culmination of work I'd been doing my entire career. My boss, Sarah, told me she'd been considering me for the role for over a year, but had been waiting for me to demonstrate the kind of leadership initiative she'd finally seen in recent months. "You seem more confident lately," she said during my promotion meeting. "More focused. Whatever you've been doing differently, keep doing it." I almost laughed. What I'd been doing differently was refusing to enable other people's dysfunction, but I didn't think that would make a good answer in a professional setting. I'd also started therapy, something I'd been putting off for months while dealing with the Jessica situation. It was helpful to have an objective third party validate what I'd experienced. My therapist helped me understand the psychological dynamics at play, how David's family of origin had normalized enabling behavior, how I'd gradually lost sight of my own needs in the chaos of managing everyone else's emotions. Dr. Martinez helped me see patterns I'd been blind to during the marriage. How I'd been taking responsibility for other people's feelings instead of letting them experience the natural consequences of their choices. How I'd been confusing kindness with self-sacrifice, support with enabling. "Healthy relationships have reciprocity," she explained during one of our sessions. "You were giving and giving and giving while Jessica was taking and taking and taking. David was facilitating the imbalance instead of addressing it. That's not sustainable for anyone." The therapy sessions also helped me process the grief I felt about the end of my marriage. Even though leaving had been the right decision, I still mourned the loss of the relationship I'd thought I had with David. I grieved for the future we'd planned together, the dreams we'd shared, the trust that had been broken. But I also learned to separate grief from regret. I could feel sad about how things had ended without wishing I'd made different choices. I could miss certain aspects of my marriage without wanting to return to the dysfunction. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust my instincts again. Looking back, I could see that I'd known Jessica was trouble from the very beginning. My gut had told me that her story didn't quite add up, that her timeline for getting back on her feet was unrealistic, that her attitude toward our generosity was entitled rather than grateful. But I'd ignored those instincts in favor of being supportive and understanding. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that my instincts had been accurate all along. Jessica's behavior had been manipulative from day one, and David's response had been enabling from the beginning. I hadn't been imagining the problems or overreacting to minor issues. I'd been accurately reading a situation that other people were invested in misrepresenting. Trust yourself, Dr. Martinez told me repeatedly. Your perception of reality is valid. Your needs matter. Your boundaries are reasonable. It seemed simple, but after months of being told I was selfish, unreasonable, and unsupportive, I'd started to doubt my own judgment. Therapy helped me reclaim confidence in my ability to assess situations and make decisions that were in my best interest. The apartment had become my sanctuary. I'd decorated it exactly how I wanted, with clean lines, natural light, and plenty of space for both work and relaxation. I had a proper home office where I could take client calls without interruption. I had a kitchen where I could cook meals without finding someone else's dirty dishes in the sink. I had a bathroom where my skincare products stayed where I put them. Simple pleasures, but they felt revolutionary after a year and a half of sharing space with someone who had no respect for boundaries. I'd also rediscovered the joy of solitude. For the first time in my adult life, I lived alone and I loved it. I could read for hours without interruption. I could work late into the night without worrying about disturbing anyone. I could decide to rearrange my furniture on a whim without consulting anyone else's preferences. I started hosting small dinner parties for friends and colleagues, something I'd stopped doing while Jessica was living with us. It felt amazing to invite people into a space that was truly mine, to cook for guests without worrying about someone else monopolizing the kitchen or eating the ingredients I'd planned to use. The dating had been slow and careful. I wasn't ready for anything serious, but it was nice to remember what it felt like to have conversations with men who actually listened to what I had to say. Men who asked about my work, my interests, my goals. Men who didn't expect me to prioritize their family members over my own well-being. I'd been on a few second dates, a couple of third dates, nothing that had developed into a relationship yet. But I wasn't in a hurry. For the first time in years, I was genuinely happy with my own company. If someone amazing came along, great. If not, I had a full, satisfying life on my own terms. Never again would I compromise my basic needs to accommodate someone else's dysfunction. Never again would I allow someone to convince me that wanting respect in my own home made me selfish. Never again would I enable someone's irresponsibility at the expense of my own well-being. David had lost his house, his sister, and his marriage because he'd chosen to enable someone who didn't deserve it. Jessica had burned through her welcome with everyone who tried to help her, leaving a trail of debt and broken trust wherever she went. Me? I'd learned that sometimes walking away is the only way to save yourself. Some lessons are expensive, but they're always worth the cost in the end. The best part? I finally understood what home felt like when it was actually mine. No more walking on eggshells, no more accommodating someone else's drama, no more making myself smaller to make room for someone else's dysfunction. Just me, my space, my choices, and my future, exactly as it should be. A year later, I got a text from an unknown number. It took me a moment to realize it was from Jessica. Hey Em, heard you're doing really well. I'm in LA now, working on some really exciting projects. Would love to catch up sometime. I know things got weird with David, but that doesn't have to affect our relationship, right? Hope you're doing good. Hugs and kisses, Jess. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some bridges are meant to stay burned.